Hello, everyone, and welcome to Upbuilding the Self. This is Michael Sloyer, and I am here with Hari Prasad and Rasanath. Good morning to both of you guys.
Good evening
to you. So today for our topic, we are going to be talking about the 4 levels of motivation. And the way that this topic came to be the topic for our podcast is an interesting story. So Rasanath, a few weeks ago, you had a call with a potential client about doing some work with them, and you had gotten permission from this client to record the call so that you could share it with the rest of our team so that we could be more up to speed on the potential and the work and possibly offer our insights. And so you shared this recording with us. And as I was watching it, I, of course, was paying a lot of attention to what the client was sharing and the potential work, and was thinking about my ideas. But what really struck me about that conversation was in it when you shared this framework of the 4 levels of motivation. And I had heard you briefly speak about it at some point in the past, but I had never really seen it in the wild. And it was so profound as you shared. And I thought, this is going to affect how I do my work, how I think about my own motivation. And I'm also really excited to share it on a podcast. So I'm really looking forward to discussing both this topic with both of you today.
Well, thank you. I always liken you to, because many times when I share these things, it just comes spontaneously based on experience and learning that I have had before. And to be able to pick this out and say, well, this can be a very good podcast topic for the audience. I deeply appreciate you taking the time to listen, and also the way you're listening for what can be very valuable content is incredibly helpful for me and for the work that we do. So deeply appreciate that.
Good. And I hope I'm not bypassing my own work by just thinking about, we got to show this on a podcast. But maybe some of that will become more clear as we talk about this framework today. Good. So maybe, Rasanath, you could get us started by sharing what are the 4 levels of motivation and where did this framework come from?
Thank you. So the framework comes from the Bhagavad-Gita, which is the basis of all the work that we do. And I think we have mentioned that before. So the Bhagavad-Gita is the classic on yoga wisdom coming from India. It's the wisdom spoken 5,000 years ago, and the principles are so incredibly relevant, universally relevant and timeless. And so the concept of the 4 levels of motivation comes from chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita. And the speaker of the Gita, Krishna, talks about how one approaches one's spiritual life. But the universality is that we can see these 4 levels of motivation happening in whatever we approach, whether it's a relationship, whether it's our personal decision making. We can apply that lens, that framework, to our own life. So the 4 levels of motivation that Krishna speaks about. The first one, and when we say the first, this is not the highest. We are going from, I would say, the lowest to the highest. And when we say the lowest, the idea behind it is to, again, the experience that one level of motivation creates versus another level of motivation creates. So the first level of motivation is motivated by fear. And fear typically is characterized by avoidance. I want to avoid what I'm afraid of the most. And when our life is steeped and immersed in this basic motivation, everything that I'm looking at is coming from the lens of avoiding trouble for myself because I'm afraid of the consequences, then I live my life in avoidance. So that's the first level. The second level is the level of prospect. And the level of prospect is characterized by strong attachments to goals. And I would say not just goals, but I would say results. That's, I think, a slightly different characterization of, we can have goals at higher levels of motivation too. But the second level of motivation, it's results. I really want to see um, the results that I'm aiming for, and I'm very attached to those results coming in a certain time, in a certain way. And my life is purely motivated by achieving those results. And the challenge with that is, while we may be achieving our results, we may also end up using other people to get the results that we want. So there is definitely a big amount of objectification of other people, where I now start seeing people as ways for me to get to a certain result. So it's still me oriented. It's still steeped in the results that I want, and the relationships that I form are transactional. So in level one, the relationships that I form, the level of fear and avoidance that we talked about earlier, the relationships that I form are on the level of survival. I need somebody so that I can survive. And in level two, the relationships that I form are transactional. I need this person to get this result, but I'm not necessarily, my relationship doesn't go any deeper than transactional.
Okay, so before you get into level 3 and level 4, I just want to reflect back what you've shared so far. So at the bottom level, which is the lowest level, the level that we don't want to be at, but it's there at the bottom, is motivation by fear, and that's characterized by avoidance.
Yes.
And a desire for survival is kind of the key thing that is top of mind, even if I'm not fully aware that that's what's happening.
And then security is a big piece of this. Like, I just want to feel safe and like everything's going to be okay.
And then level 2 is motivation by goals or by prospect, with a particular attachment to the results that come from those goals. Right. And that's characterized by objectification of others. Again, even if I don't mean to objectify, that's often what's happening, and more of transactional relationships.
That's right. Also, it's not, so definitely objectification of others, but I also make myself an object, in the sense, when I want to get to a certain result, I make myself a commodity so that people can buy, and then I can get the result that I want. So overarchingly, one subconsciously and unconsciously objectifies everything as a means to getting to the results, because the attachment to the results, it almost becomes an obsession for results.
So this is also where there's a huge restlessness that's just beneath the surface all the time. Endless desire and a frustration that I'm not achieving all of my desires immediately, and I may never, because not everything is in my control. And it's just constantly running beneath the surface. Sometimes I'm aware of it, much of the time I'm not, but there's always feeling of lack of fulfillment, and I need to do more, and it keeps me on the treadmill.
Now, when that gets to a certain stage of unhealth, then very quickly the move will happen from level 2 to level 1.
So you can go down.
You can go down pretty quickly, because now what happens is I see that I'm actually afraid of not hitting my results, right? Or not getting the results that I want. And so I slip into level 1, which is motivated by fear. So those two levels, level 1 and level 2, are quite closely tied to each other. Then there is a difference in terms of what I'm motivated towards, but I can very easily slip from level 2 to level 1 when I don't get the results that I want.
So it seems like level 1, I'm running away from something. I'm trying to avoid it. You used the word before. And level 2, at least how it will occur to me, is I'm running towards something. I'm running toward these goals.
That's right.
This is attachment and avoidance, or like, one is that I want something so badly, but then underlying that is also, well, I don't want to not have that. And so that's why these are so closely tied, and they can easily go back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Attachment and avoidance are two sides of the same coin in many ways. But you're right. Michael, when you characterized running away from and running towards, that's a clear and easy way to distinguish between those two levels.
Okay, and so let's talk about now levels 3 and level 4.
Now, level 3 and level 4 there is a certain breakaway from how level 1 and level 2 work. So level 3 is where I'm motivated by a sense of duty, purpose, and responsibility. And while I still have goals, how I get to those goals become as important and are even more important. And when now I want to live my life based on certain values, and I become dedicated to living by those values. When I show up based on those values, and I hold myself accountable to those values. And even when I don't get the result, as long as I have lived my values, I feel that it's all right. I've shown up the way I need to show up, and the results are not fully under my control anyways. So there's a sense of natural detachment that starts to come at level 3. Not that I'm not focusing on the goals. I want to get to the results, but I don't have the same kind of obsession as I had in level 2. I am more focused on how am I showing up consistent with my value structure. And if I can do that day in and day out, I feel quite fulfilled, actually.
There's a determination with humility that is very different from the kind of determination that you see at level 2. At level 2, it's just like all guns blazing, it's all on me, and I carry all of the stress and intensity of that. And when things are going great, I'm glorifying myself and, trying to prop myself up to feel good. In level 3, it's very different. The determination is to do this because it's the right thing to do. And it's very quiet and humble and beautiful. And it touches people. And I feel touched. And I don't have to prop myself up to feel okay. I actually know I'm okay because I'm doing the right thing. So I don't have to convince myself. Doesn't mean that I don't need encouragement or people to help me see things about myself that are, making an impact. That's also needed. But there's a humility and a beauty and a way in which I can affect people, and that I myself am affected, which is closed off at level 2. And very important is that my goals change. So it's not just the way to the goals, it's actually what my goals are. Now, there can be an overlap between goals at any of these 4 levels, but there is also the opportunity to shift your goals according to your level, depending on what the situation is. And so at level 2, my goals are all self-oriented. So I may have some necessities that I need to fulfill for myself at level 3. And then that's where the way that I do that is very different. And the reason I do that is also very different. It's because I actually have to do that. I have things that I need to take care of. I have responsibilities to myself just to live in this world, to take care of my family, myself. You can use as an example. But then also, it's really hard for someone at level 3 to relate to some of the goals of someone at level 2. So, for example, at level 2, my goal might be I want to create the most successful company in my domain. And at level 3, one thinks, well, that's really a temporary thing and it's very me oriented. It's not so much about serving society with the service that we provide. It's really about I want to be the best. And that becomes harder for me to relate to. I actually think, you know what? If we become the best, it should be because we serve the best, because that's the right thing to do. And my values will speak for themselves. And I'm not afraid of being the best. I'm not afraid of like creating an amazing organization. It just has to be not for that reason. It's not because I want to be the best. It's because I want to serve the best. And so I have determination to reach that goal, but also recognize it's not all in my control. And it has to be for the right reason in the right way. And again, goals will shift accordingly.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's super helpful. So in summary, for level 3, it's motivation by duty or responsibility. There's a strong orientation towards what my values are. I've gotten clear on what those values are, and I'm working towards showing up in honoring those values. And in doing so, my goals start to shift away from pure me-driven goals to the goal actually becomes honoring my values and showing up in a way that is very responsible and honors the duty that I have.
And honoring other people.
Yeah.
What happens is the goals are dictated by the values at level 3. They're not dictated by purely results. Like, okay, this will make me the best. This will make the company the number one company. It's dictated by what are the values of this company, or what are my personal values, and how do I live them day in and day out. And there is again, when we talk about duty and responsibility, it seems very dry, but it's not. It doesn't feel dry. When somebody feels their values in their heart very deeply, they feel so motivated showing up that way. And you know what? Others experience it. This is where leaders become truly inspiring, because they live by example. And when others see them living the values that they profess to live by, they become a role model. They become very inspiring examples for other people.
So let's go into level 4, and then we can start talking about how to actually apply this framework.
Hari Prasad is scratching his beard, which means something is cooking. I want to hear what's cooking.
I missed that.
Thank you. I was just thinking about how there's a distinction again between level 2 and level 3 that's really important. And I don't want people to write off level 3 because level 2 is sexier. So that's my concern. And what I wanted to showcase is that, yes, at level 2, there's an incredible drive. And that's very attractive. That's irresistible to us. We're a culture that worships that. That's all we do is just worship that, whether it's Hollywood stars or, the moguls of the business world or whatever it is. I mean, those are 2 very prominent ones. Athletes, there's so much there. We worship that. That's our whole, like all of our consciousness is consumed with that. So naturally, we're all going to be building towards level 2 motivation. And that that has to be seen for what it is, which is me oriented. And yes, it's attractive. I have to recognize that, but it's not all it's cracked up to be. We'll talk more about that. But the distinction that I wanted to showcase, level 3 is also attractive. It's just quiet. So somebody who is serving because they care about other people and their well-being, and they want to do right by themselves and society, that's not a small thing. And that's not something which has weak motivation. That's something which actually has more powerful drive. Because when I feel a responsibility, let's take the example of my family. I feel a duty to provide for my family. That's more motivating than to provide for myself. I mean, I always give this this example that when I have to cook for myself, it's painful. But when I have to cook for others, it's like, oh, that's really nice. I'm so happy that I get to do that. And even though it's often harder, I mean, it is harder to cook for more people, and to also make sure that it's pleasing to them, the stakes are higher, all of that is there. It's harder, but it's actually more fulfilling, and my determination increases, not decreases. So I feel more excited and more determined to achieve a certain result without it being about the results, but it being about the values. And so let us not write off level 3, because it's not a small thing. The drive is very powerful. It's more powerful. And you see great people. I mean, even someone like Mahatma Gandhi, he's operating at level 3 and is, I mean, God, his drive was huge, huge.
And this is also, my hypothesis is that we are a culture that's functioning on level 2, hoping for results on level 3. And we are hoping for a society that would live by values when the collective consciousness is still obsession towards results. And this is the paradox that we are experiencing in our country today.
And Hari,
actually,
I just want to say, I also think that you're special in that what you shared about the cooking example. I know that to be so true about you. I've seen that in action, and I don't know that everyone feels that way. Like the stress of cooking for more people or having to do it versus like, I'm just going to do it for myself. People, there's not always that joy or that like I'm honoring my duty and responsibility. Now people will say, and I think this is the tricky part between level 3 and level 2, like, yeah, I'm just doing my duty, but there's like a resentment and and really they're motivated by level 2. They have more me focused goals that are being masked by this. I'm just doing my duty. And this is the same thing in the workplace. So many people like go to work or take higher paying jobs because they think that they're doing their duty to their family, but really they're operating from level 2 or maybe even level 1, where it's much more about me.
100%. 100%. Thank you for that. Yeah, and this also speaks to, where are you coming from? It's going to feel different depending on where you're coming from. If you're trying to operate at level 3, but you're not actually there, and deep down you don't really want to be there, you just kind of want to appear like you're there and convince yourself so that you feel good about yourself, then it's going to feel very dissatisfying, because you'll be like, well, I didn't gain from that. So I was serving everybody, I did the right thing, but what did I get? So then it's dissatisfying, right? Because at the end of the day, it's, what did I get? And if you're actually trying to operate from level 3 very sincerely, and you're really dutiful, then you naturally care, what did other people get from what I was doing? And not like, oh, did they think I'm amazing? But actually, were they satisfied because I care about their satisfaction more than I care about how I am doing in relation to them? And then when you serve from that place, it feels completely different. If other people are satisfied, I feel, oh, that's so wonderful. I'm so happy that I was able to affect their lives in that way. And it's not so self-referential. Yes, I'm still in the equation. I care that I was able to affect their lives, but it's not about, therefore, I'm so great. It's about, wow, I was able to do something meaningful. I was useful to them, and that feels so good. So you can't fake this. And that's what you're pointing out so artfully. You can't fake this. You have to really imbibe the value system, the higher values of level 3 to get the fulfillment of actually living on that level.
Right. So you can try to fake it. And a lot of people do try to fake
all
it.
the time,
but
all the
you don't,
time.
Yeah, you don't actually get that fulfillment.
No, and I mean, again, talk about media training and the culture that we have. So when athletes go through media training, which is such a fixture of our culture and speaks so much about our culture, it speaks volumes, that they know the right things to say. Oh yeah. I just had this glorious victory, but actually it was really all about the team. The team was great, and the way the other team showed up, it was noble. So I'm super happy that everything worked out. Team is great. Team is great. Team was great. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, I did this. I'm awesome. And you know what? My team is awesome because I'm awesome. And of course, I should have an awesome team. So we try to fake this stuff all over the place, left and right. This is happening in every sphere of life. People, I mean, when leaders come to the podium to inspire others or give a status update or whatever it is that they have to deliver, they're trying to speak on level 3 in many ways, not always, not in all ways, but a lot of the talk will adhere to level 3, that this is all for you. But it's not really. And people can feel the difference so deeply. They may not be consciously feeling it, but the effect speaks for itself. It's totally different. Anyone can say the right things, and everybody is trained to say the right things in some shape or form. But it's another thing to mean them deeply.
Okay, so let's go into level 4. I'm sorry for introducing it 10 minutes back, and we still haven't gotten to it. So let's get into it, and then we'll talk about some real life examples here.
Level 4 is fully motivated by love. I feel such a deep sense of love and affection for what I do for people in my life, that my actions are actually coming from that place. It's a pull. This is where you actually experience it's not the other 3 kinds of motivation that we're talking about requires a certain okay, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. And level 4, there is certain ease. I'm not, there is a feeling of effortlessness. And we talk a lot about flow and being in a flow state. And so, I was in so much of a flow state. Real flow state only happens in level 4, where I'm being pulled by something that's much higher than myself. And so, to wake up early in the morning is not like, oh my God, I have to set the alarm, I have to wake up to it. It just becomes a natural part of who I am. Talking about small activities, because there is something that's very deeply calling me. I'm being pulled in a certain direction. I'm being pulled to do things for others. And that is level 4, motivation by pure love.
Level 3 is also caring about something bigger than me.
Right. But it has the pull is still a push in the sense. Thank you for clarifying that. It's still a push where I know that this is the right thing to do, but my heart is still, it's like I'm coming from a place of still having to push in that direction. Level 4 is just a pull. It's like I'm just being pulled from the other side.
Level 3 is I should be doing this. Level 4 is I love to do this. I can't wait to do this. And there's you get some glimpse of that at level 3, some glimpse, but it's not the full thing. It's really, it's a powerful motivation at level 3 because I genuinely care, but it's so much bigger at level 4. And we're often afraid. We say, well, you shouldn't say should, which is a should in and of itself. But we're afraid of those shoulds. But those shoulds are necessary for us to live in line with our values. And so in the self-help world, when we try to destroy all shoulds, it doesn't actually work. And you end up with a bunch of shoulds, like I should destroy all of those shoulds. It collapses in and of itself. So level 3 is about I should do this, and that's necessary, but it's not as wonderful. It's ecstatic at level 4 when you feel, oh my God, this is everything. This is everything. And I can't not do it. I'm just being carried.
Anyone who's listening on audio, you wouldn't have seen this, but when we were just describing level 4, there was just a big smile and even laughter across all of our faces. And I'm not exactly sure where it was coming from for the two of you, but for me, I was just thinking like, that's amazing. That sounds so incredible to feel that pull towards, I can't wait to do this.
That's beautiful. For me, where it comes from is the tapping into a glimpse of that experience and seeing people who operate on that level, knowing what it's like to be in their presence, knowing what it's like to follow in their footsteps, and catching a little taste of it. And by speaking about it, you have to get into if you want to be sincere in communicating what this is, you have to actually tap into it. You have to really get into the skin of being at level 4. And so there's something very beautiful that comes into the heart as you're meditating and trying to share what this experience of level 4 is.
Now, a lot of people confuse level 2 and level 4. So many times people say, "Oh, I feel called to do this."
Yes.
What I'm doing is I am imagining myself with the cup in my hand. And I think that's love. The same thing happens even in relationships, right? Romantic relationships, where it is still operating on level 2. I mistake it for level 4.
Mm-hmm.
And then I become disappointed that it's not that experience. Why? Because many times it's still motivated by, well, if I'm with this person, what will people think about me? Or if I'm with this person, what are all the things that I will get from this person? So there is still a certain amount, what we call love is still objectified. It's still self-oriented, right? But on level 4, the experience of that is something completely different. And I want to draw the distinction here because these two levels can many times be misunderstood. And what it requires, this is what happens for many of us who have been, who are married, who have relationships. We start the relationship thinking it's on level 4, but we are shocked to find at some point that it's actually at level 2. And when we can be honest about that, then we can hope to climb to level 3, even in our personal relationships, where we show up from a place where we want to live our values in relation to that, with respect to that relationship. And when we can do that consistently, then after a while, we can experience level 4.
So we can be operating at level 2, motivated by goals, and still feel that we love the other person. And
yes,
still feel this feeling of love.
But the love for the other person is subordinate to to what I get from what my definition of love is still, it's not completely about the other. It's still about the self. And I love the other because the other actually gives me something because of which I love the other.
It's
And
not
not
about
pure
the
love.
real self. It's not about the real self. It's about my ego self, my identity of who I think I should be, and the validation that I'm getting for that.
And to be very clear, like, part of this is that there's a blind spot here.
Yes.
Is that I don't actually know that this is happening. And I think this is why this framework is so important, is because we want to wake up to where we're actually operating from.
Yes.
So even if we feel like we are operating from love, or even if we feel real love and we feel loving towards other people, it doesn't mean that we're in the higher levels of 3 and into 4. Yeah, sorry, Hari, you were going to say.
No. This is great. This is exactly what I wanted to speak to. That wisdom texts will draw the distinction between lust and love, and that is a very confronting distinction. Lust means it's about me, and it's based on surface things. It's like, the most common usage is, I'm attracted to this person's body, so let's get together because that'll be exciting, that'll be awesome. And because that person's attracted to my body, then they're gaining. So I'm being selfless. It mutually works out. But lust never actually works like that. And this happens also in all kinds of subtle ways. Like, we validate each other's egos is at the basis of all lust, whether it's for your body and my body, or whether it's for your mind and my mind, or even, if you get a little bit more sophisticated, closer to level 3, it's, oh, you have great values, I have great values, we just match. And that's about the highest that it gets, I think, at level 2, getting closer to level 3. But it's always around what I can get and how my ego gets excited about that. When you talk about love, it's not about my ego, and it's not about these surface things. It's about what can I give, and not so that says I'm great because I'm such a giver. It's about the giving itself, and it's about the care for the other person. And things will test that. I mean, we can say all day long that, yeah, that's exactly why I do everything I do. But you will be tested. And our divorce rate is extremely high, embarrassingly high. And our level of dissatisfaction in relationships and dysfunction in existing relationships is extremely high, embarrassingly high. There's very little healthy functioning relationship, even just on a psychological level. And that says a lot. That's because it's about lust. It's about what I get from the other person. And as soon as I'm not getting that, then I'm reactive, or I just give them up. I'll find somebody else who is worthy of me, and I'll get what I deserve.
So, which is why any form of sustainable relationship, whether it's romantic or otherwise, only happens when healthy, in a healthy way, only happens when values, when two people in that relationship very clearly know their values and are living that day in and day out. Right. And that then makes, because there is consistency, there is already a certain degree of selflessness, because I want to show up consistent with my values to serve. And that creates the foundation for any healthy relationship to then start to build on top of it.
You'll also see that the culture around us reinforces these levels. We've been speaking to that a bit, but it's really important to grasp how we're being pulled towards certain levels of motivations by the culture around us. It's speaking all the time. It's communicating to us. So take the advertising world. You see commercials, and I'm thinking of a certain shampoo brand. The message is, you should buy this product. You know why? Because you deserve this. Because you deserve this. Because you're worth it. Treat yourself the way, like, you're a boss. Treat yourself like a boss. You're amazing. And that's also, sadly, the self-help world is just overflowing with this kind of messaging, which is not actually helping us. So there's good in the self-help world for sure, but it's like, sometimes it feels like finding a needle in a haystack, because so much of it is ego-based. Because you're worth it, you're amazing. Level 2 motivations. And we're trying to help ourselves by feeding ourselves the same poison that's keeping us stuck at a low level of motivation, and therefore consciousness, and therefore satisfaction or lack thereof.
Yeah, and we haven't talked so much so far about level 1, but that's also what our culture is feeding us as well, which is like, if you don't have it, like, bad things are going to happen. And so much of our work culture is also defined by fear. I mean, you talk to most, like, by far a majority of especially junior people at big organizations, and I mean even senior people as well, but you'll hear it more from junior people. There's just rampant fear, and everything, working crazy hours, being on email or Slack, being connected constantly, is driven by a fear of what will happen to me, my future, what this person will think of me, the next promotion. But it's not level 2 stuff of, like, I'm really motivated to achieve those goals. It's more fear stuff of what will happen if I don't have those goals, and if this person doesn't think a certain way about me.
Fantastic. I wanted to say exactly, really drive home that point, that don't underestimate level 1. In fact, that's the baseline. Level 1 is where the average person is at. It's where most of us are at. And why we talk about a culture of level 2 is because it's people at level 1 worshiping level 2. And level 2 appeals to the people at level 1, saying, come here. This is going to be so much better. You're going to love this. Come hither.
So while there is a lot of talk about level 3, I think we haven't still reached a place of seriousness about level 3, because that will require for us to rise above. And as I mentioned earlier, level 1 and level 2 are closely tied, but there is a certain breakaway that happens when one comes to level 3. And unless we really do that as an individual and as a collective, we will still be shackled by levels 1 and 2 and the suffering that comes from living in those levels of motivation.
Rasanath, before we were recording, you shared the example of one of the leaders that you're working with, and I think it would be really helpful here to share it with our audience.
Oh, thank you. So this leader was, when I introduced the 4 levels of motivation, this leader actually did homework of finding out where did he work predominantly, and it was clear to him that he was working predominantly in level 2. And he told me that he didn't realize there was anything higher than level 2, because that's what we are told. That's how we are educated. All the messages that we get are primarily focused on level 2. And what he also saw, that with level 2 functioning as the co-founder and a leader of a fairly large organization, he saw how it was creating suffering and the objectification that resulted, using people towards while still speaking about values. And this is the tricky part. What he experienced was the pain, because he always said that authenticity was a big part of how I live my life. And it became clear to him that while he was speaking on level 3, he was still living on level 2. And because he was somewhat aware of his values, he began to see the fallacy in it. And so now his work as the center of gravity then suddenly shifted to looking up to level 3. And what he has been doing systematically is taking responsibility for his level 2 behavior and going back to people that he felt he had, and at that time he felt very justified for how he showed up, and going back to them and taking full responsibility for how he showed up without, and he didn't even tell me that he was going to do this. He just did it. And I heard it from other people who I work with. Hey, what happened here? This was very surprising. And you see the center of gravity has shifted clearly to move towards level 3. And this leader is taking steps very systematically to consistently work on level 3.
Beautiful. And what you share highlights a really practical way to move up in levels, which is to actually take responsibility for where we're at and for the cost that both ourselves and other people have paid for us being at the level that we're at.
It's beginning to wake up to when we profess ourselves to live on a higher level, we don't actually wake up to where we are functioning. But when we wake up to where we are functioning, yes, it can be very confronting. And that confrontation should be the motivation to change our life, to change how we live, to stop professing to live on a higher level, but to truly take responsibility for where we are and to start to move towards a higher level genuinely.
So how to move up in levels of motivation, which also is a way to move up in consciousness, that is dependent on two things, really. One is seeing where you're at first. You can't move if you don't know where you are in the first place. How will you go anywhere? So you see where you're at honestly, and that requires humility. And the second thing is you look up what's beyond where I'm at, and you see, how do people operate genuinely at that level, and how can I learn from them and move myself closer? Rasanath, you put it very nicely that your gravitational pull is in a different place now, where your center of gravity, you're trying to shift it. And Soren Kierkegaard so beautifully, profoundly lays this out when he's talking about his own framework, which matches very nicely. He talks about spheres of living or levels of motivation, which correspond. And he's talking about how, in order to get to the higher one, you have to be, and you alluded to this, you have to be looking up. You have to be looking up, and you have to keep your gaze fixed. The goal is no longer what my goal was. I may have to also maintain that goal, but that's not the real goal. The real goal is, how do I get up? So I'm keeping my gaze fixed up on the level above me. And ideally on the highest level, because then, if you shoot for the stars, you'll end up in the sky at the very least, right? So the higher your motivation, the better and the more momentum. But at the very least, you need to be able to look up to the next level. And to some degree, you're going to have to do that anyway, even if you are setting your sights on the highest, which we recommend, of course. Still, you'll have to better understand what's the next step. How do I get to the one above me and keep my gaze on that?
And I really hope that is one of, if not the biggest takeaway that people have from this conversation, from listening to this podcast, is that there is something higher in the case of the leader that you're working with, like waking up to the possibility of something higher. And Hari, too. Sorry, you're going to say before.
No. Go ahead. And then
I was going to ask. You talked about the first step. We got to figure out where we're at, and the second step to look up. What are some questions we might ask ourselves? Let's say we're not working with a coach, but we're actually doing this work independently or in relationship to people in our family or at our work. What are some of the ways that we can get a sense of where we're functioning at right now?
It takes some detective work to really dig in here. The best places to look at are asking questions about, why am I frustrated? Why am I feeling a certain way? To really own the difficult emotions that we experience on a day-to-day basis, because in those emotions are also the answers to what is really motivating me. And to stepping into them to really gain clarity on, well, why am I feeling frustrated? Why am I feeling irritated? Why am I feeling angry? And many times, when we're honest, the response to that will indicate the level of motivation.
I think
it's the best place to start.
I think it's the series of why questions to try to get to the root of our motivation. So, why do you want this? Why, what's important about that? Why do you want that? Okay, well, why that? Why that? Until you get to something where it's like, oh, this is what I'm really about. Because we tell ourselves so many stories about why we're doing things. We have to get to the real thing, and we have to be fearless to get to the real thing. So ask the whys in succession and find out where you hit the deepest motivation.
Yeah.
And hint, it's probably going to be level 1 or 2.
The reason why this exercise is so important, and that's why how in today's world we live in a world where if I have to know who I am, I just take an online quiz, because that will tell me who I am. It shortchanges the process of really understanding where we are. The only way we are going to know where we are is when we put in the time and the energy and the effort to understand ourselves. It's not going to happen in any other way. So there are no shortcuts here. We have to take, and this is where the sense of responsibility begins. It's by taking responsibility for our lives. Let's understand what is really motivating us. And when Vipin wrote the piece, "This is your damn life," and we did a podcast on it, this is our life. We have to take responsibility for our life and really understand what's driving it. And without knowing that, how do we lead our lives, really?
Yeah, and remember, the average consciousness is at level 1. So unless we're something, we all want to think that we're above average and we're all like incredibly special, which is the ego. It's also, there's something natural and human about that, because everyone is the real self, who we are at the deepest level is actually very special, but we want to take the shortcut and feel the ego gratification of, aren't I special, as opposed to actually just being special and not being worried about, am I special or not? So our tendency is going to be to think we're at a higher level of motivation than we are. We need to know this. And we need to actually get in there, again, fearlessly. I also think it's important to clarify, why is level 2 higher than level 1? Because you have to really understand, what is the progression here? What are we moving towards, and what does it take? If I find myself at level 1, why do I need to get to level 2? Why can't I just jump? So there's a pathway here. And at level 1, it's survival mode. I can't really consider other people when I'm in survival mode. I have to survive first. Put your oxygen mask on yourself before you do for others, right? This is an expression that you hear very often, and we also use. But that it's just practical. You can't. I mean, your consciousness is going to be consumed with me, if you don't have security, if you don't have the basics, and it's very difficult. It's like if somebody is coming from poverty, and what to speak of if they're continuing to be in poverty, how are they going to start like performing a duty for the sake of the world? It just doesn't make any sense. It's not like I need to get food on the table. And this is how a lot of us also dismiss higher motivations, because we haven't had our basic needs met, or we feel the struggle for survival in meeting our basic needs, even if they are totally met. So at level 2, it's higher because I'm not as worried about that. There's a little space. There's a little space to think, okay, like where can we get to? It's the difference between a negative motivation and a positive motivation. Now, it's not super positive. It's not positive so much in the sense of like, oh, this is good for me. But there's something of, it's like going, Michael, you had said this earlier, going towards versus going away. When you're trying to avoid something, it feels even worse. And it isn't sometimes as necessary. You know, if you're being like hunted by somebody, you have to avoid. But imagine living your life feeling hunted by somebody. That's what level 1 is like. That's exactly what level 1 is like. And we're not even aware of the suffering that we're in because it's so deep rooted, and the consciousness is afraid to feel that suffering. So we find escapes, we find ways of not feeling it. But at level 2, the suffering is not quite as high. There's a little bit more spaciousness. I can move towards something. It's something which is selfish and it's not fulfilling, but at least I'm moving towards something. The level of suffering is not quite as high, and there's a little bit more space to consider other people. And then I can go towards level 3, where I am really concerned about other people and what is the right thing to do and what will actually fulfill the real me.
That's great. Thank you, Hari. Yeah, there's a there can be that confusion between level 1 and level 2, and to understand why 2 is actually higher than 1, that we're coming from a place of feeling enough. People like to talk about scarcity and abundance mindsets, feeling enough abundance that I can actually run towards something rather than just avoid it.
Yeah, and I should say also that it's not that level 3 is not fulfilling the real me. It's starting to move in that direction. Level 4 is where you fulfill the real me. But I'm starting to catch a little glimpse of something at level 3 that is wonderful and powerful and motivating. And if I get steeped in that and I understand I'm looking up fixed on level 4, then I can move to that rarest stage, which is actually transcendent of everything, which roots us in the real self and makes us free to be completely happy and unencumbered by the anxieties and pains of existence. Because nothing can shake me when I'm living as my real self. I am totally satisfied and ecstatic to be of service to other people.
So as we start to come to a close here, Rasanath, you had shared in one of your proposals what trust looks like within a organization or community that are operating at the different levels of motivation. So I was wondering if you could walk us through that.
Sure. So level 1, where the primary motivation is survival, it's a very siloed organization. Everybody is trying to survive, and many times at the cost of somebody else. So it leads to what we call a very insecure, very toxic work environment where there is no trust that really exists at that point. So that's at level 1. And level 2, we just talked about the difference between level 1 and level 2. They are very closely tied, and then there is some more spaciousness that gets created in level 2 because I come out of that survival, that intense survival mindset. So level 2, because it's also motivated by results, there is frequent ups and downs in employee morale. Like when we are hitting results, it's like, and I've heard this talked about in organizations, and there is an element of truth to it. They say, well, when everything is successful, we don't have to worry about all that. We just have to hit the results and everything will be fine, right? That's the drive. And while we hit results, everything is great. But the interesting thing is, as soon as you hit the first quarter results, you're already looking at second quarter and thinking, oh my God, the demand in second quarter is going to be so much more. Now, my survival, the baseline of my survival has just moved up, in the sense that once I get to a certain result, that becomes my baseline of survival. And now I'm looking to the next result to hit the next result. So there's just frequent up and down in when I'm hitting the results, it's great, but it dies very quickly. I have to look at the next result, and it goes between having trust in competency based on results. So when people help me attain results, I trust them and everything is great. I celebrate. And the same people working as hard, when they don't get me the results, I immediately lose trust in them. Say, oh, okay, I have to change something here. I have to let people go. So again, it's not a secure place.
Yeah, so there's actually not a lot of trust at any, even when the results are good. There's not a lot of real trust. There's good feelings that are happening, and people are appreciating one another for hitting those results. But this trust of like, if things go badly, will everyone have my back and there is their support? That's not actually there.
And so I already know, and this is where the objectification comes into play. When I'm just an object for somebody else's success, I know that my value only exists as long as I perform. Right? I know that. And I also know, and I feel bad deep down, that I'm not actually valued as a person. I'm valued for my performance. So the pressure that it puts on someone is there's suffering there. I can not truly feel safe.
Yeah. And we ourselves, if we don't value ourselves as separate from our value that we give to our organization, it's crazy to think that other people would value us in that way.
Exactly. So it's a low trust environment. While there's some semblance of some trust situationally, there is no real deep trust that's available. Level 3, because the primary driving force becomes living by certain values, and those values have a deeper sense of purpose attached to them. Now we are starting to see where we are starting to truly form relationships on the level of understanding how our values align. Right? And while we still want to while there are still goals, as long as we actually acted on our values, that's where trust starts to live. If you showed up, and this is the shift from on trust based on just competence to trust based on somebody's character. And now my level of trust is much deeper, where when I trust somebody's character, I trust that they're living by values because of how they show up. There is a much deeper level of security, and the relationships are formed at a much deeper level, which gives rise to naturally a much higher trusting work environment, a much more balanced work environment, a healthy work environment, where over time, then people become very effective because they feel secure. And when they feel secure, they now have the permission to bring their best self to work, to experiment, to intentionally experiment. And even when they fail, because they have shown up based on their values, there is a way in which the failure only becomes a true experiment in learning versus a question about, somebody's, this person is not good. It's no longer objectification. We start to really see the person for their values and showing up, living their values. So the trust level is much deeper. And at level 4, trust never wavers. It's like it's love. It and the level of love that exists because of the connection with our truest, deepest selves. There is not even a question of whether there is trust or not. It doesn't even cross anybody's minds at any point. So that's where there's the highest experience. It's truly, for the lack of a better term, but also a term that's fairly accurate, it's truly an ecstatic working environment. People feel so delighted because it's happening on a level of a connection that's it's much deeper than the ego.
But we don't see examples of that, and it's like well, I still have to report to the board, or my company, my leader still has to report to the board, and they're driving for results. And if you're not performing, then you're out, or you better start performing, because if you don't, then we can't exist as a company. So how does this apply? It starts to feel abstract, even at level 3. What to speak of level 4?
So level 4 only becomes accessible, truly accessible, when we have reached level 3 and are settled in it. Again, it goes back to what you shared, Hari Prasad, looking up. When in levels 1 and 2, the ego has such a strong hold that level 4 seems to be, and this is where a lot of companies also say that's just touchy-feely stuff. It's a very comfortable, convenient dismissal of not wanting to strive for something higher. Partly because the tangibility of it doesn't exist. I can't even, when I'm so focused on me, how can I even begin to think about the other? And then what to speak about living my life consistently in that place? That's one thing. The second thing is what it's asking for me to do, the way it confronts, to climb to level 3 and to level 4 means I need to acknowledge something about me. Right? And so for those two reasons, many times level 3, level 3 is still considered. This is the interesting thing. We give honor to level 3 by at least faking it. But we don't even give honor to level 4. Mm-hmm. Because it feels so out of reach. So the important thing here is to stop faking living on level 3, but focus on really living level 3. And then when we do that consistently, level 4 will start to become so much more accessible.
I can imagine many of my coaching clients, and I'm sure many of yours as well, who would say, yeah, but it's just not practical. Like, you got to live in the real world, and the real world doesn't value or doesn't reward level 3 motivation. Again, what to speak of level 4? So I just got to do what I got to do. And I mean, come on, that's the world that we live in.
Well, what we are actually acknowledging at that point is the world is working on, the collective consciousness of the world is working at a certain level, and I just want to live there. So it's like basically saying, yeah, the average grade in my class is a B+, and so that's what they value. Otherwise, if I score an A-, then others will reject me and I will no longer belong to this class. So what I need to do is I need to score a B. I need to score a B+. That's essentially what we're saying. So this is what the reason why we are having this conversation is, if we have to have any hope of raising the collective consciousness. And we are all talking about impact and what impact we want to create in society. we can't create impact if we continue to live in the same consciousness that society expects us to live in. We have to rise above that consciousness, because when we do that, our capacity to pull, the rising tide lifts all boats, right? Our capacity to pull others to that level of consciousness increases.
I think just the last question on this is, within certain environments, how do we do that? Because it seems like everything is stacked against that. So again, somebody who's an organizational leader is going to feel the pressure of needing to deliver the results. It's already stacked in the direction of level 2. So I feel like I have to play by that playbook. Otherwise, we're not even going to exist. And then I go to level 1, right? So how do we, in those constrained level 2 environments, push the needle above that?
It's gradual. It doesn't happen overnight. It can happen overnight, but it's gradual. The first thing that we will have to do is, can I align my results with my values? That's the place to start. The place to start is to clarify my values and to live them. And then to start to align the results based on those values. And if the values and the results have, a great degree of separation, then we have to iteratively align those two things. Because if they're not aligned, then we again slip into the level 2 way of working.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself, well, why am I doing this in the first place? If I really want
the biggest question.
Yeah, if I want to stay within that same level of motivation, knock yourself out. But if I'm saying that I really want to operate at level 3, well, again, the test is going to be there. Do you really want to? And what are you willing to give for that? Because that's what it takes. This is not a cheap thing. What are you willing? Are you willing to change your goal? Are you willing to change your environment? Are you willing to follow people who are operating at that level by learning from them?
True.
It's a real question.
What am I really motivated by? What is driving me? And Hari, what you shared earlier about asking why below that and why below that until we really get to the deepest why. And Rasanath, thank you for sharing that vivid description of the different levels and how they affect the amount of trust that's present. It's such a clear offering for what's at stake, why this framework is so important, and why we actually do need to do the real work, both within ourselves as individuals and within our organizations, to see where we're at and to look up, to try to get to that higher level, because trust is at stake, and trust, as we say, is the fabric of everything.
The challenge with this country right now that we're experiencing, we are a culture that's, when we were functioning on level 2, when we're getting all the results that we thought we were doing really, really great. And then suddenly we realized that we are a culture that has slipped from level 2 to level 1. Because they're very, very closely tied. And right now, all the systems that we put our trust in, that actually designed from level 2 motivation. And they're crumbling, systematically crumbling, and we're somehow trying to keep them alive. But the times that we are in is clearly revealing as a collective where we are. And so I don't think, if we have to solve this problem sustainably in the long term, there is no other way other than thinking and deeply aspiring and taking seriously level 3.
Yeah. At this country, by the way, for you and me, is the US. For Michael, it's Japan. Every country has some version of this. I mean, what country is operating at level 3 motivation? It's just, this is the problem. This is and then we want world peace. How are you going to get world peace when you want to keep operating at a low level of consciousness or a low level of motivation, which produces a low level of consciousness? So this is really critical to understand the far-reaching effects of our choices as individuals and as a collective. And also gratitude to Bhaktivinoda Thakura, the great poet saint who we love to reference, who translated from the Bhagavad-Gita this framework towards the universal, not just our approach to the spiritual path, but also our approach to everything.
Thank you.
And thank you to both of you for this really rich conversation. I feel a lot more invested in this framework than I did when I started, also a lot more knowledgeable because of what you shared, and a real personal responsibility to use this in my life and in my work, to look up and head to that higher level of motivation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone listening. Deeply, deeply appreciate your kind attention and desire to sincerely move up in level of motivation.